Hello and welcome to this video series on the progressed ascendant changing from one sign to the next. In this specific video, we're going to be talking about the ascendant progressing from Aquarius into Pisces. Now, if you're having that progression, you might have your natal ascendant in Aquarius, or maybe it's in a previous sign. If you're older, it depends on what age you are when this progression is happening. I believe it takes about 20 years for the progressed ascendant to move through each sign. But regardless, even if, let's say, you had your natal ascendant in Capricorn, of course, that's always going to be your rising sign or your ascendant. Those two terms mean the same thing. That seems to confuse people a lot. Or maybe it was, like me, I was born with my ascendant in Aquarius. So I will always have an Aquarius ascendant, aka an Aquarius rising sign. But the ascendant will progress throughout my life. And that shows sort of an involvement into how I need to cope with life by facing it head on. The ascendant is, how are we facing life head on? What is our general approach to life? How do we enter the room, but not just the room, but how do we enter life? What energy do we put forward first? So let's talk about where you're coming from. You're coming from your progressed ascendant being in Aquarius, right? It has to progress all the way to the end of Aquarius before it's going to enter into Pisces. So a progressed ascendant into Aquarius is first and foremost someone who can sort of detach and observe. It's a very observant personality, an observant approach to life. It's not that you don't necessarily feel a part of life, but in a way you do. It's like you're up in a UFO and you're looking down on the earth and you're just observing, okay, this is interesting. Is this what people are like here on earth? Whether you exactly feel like an alien specifically, there is a sort of sense of life is interesting, but I sort of feel on the edge of it somehow. There's a detachment, and you're interested in what you're observing in the reality around you. Aquarius is known as the scientist, sort of the mad scientist of the zodiac. And what you'll also be noticing is that you are somehow different from everyone else. And that is part of what drives your observant personality as well. I need to kind of understand how to more or less belong in a situation in which I don't ever really feel like I belong. I always feel kind of out of place. And yet, in order to cope with life, I need to understand these groups of people that I'm around so that I can coexist. Because Aquarius is a sign that wants to coexist. So what changes when your progressed ascendant moves into Pisces? When your progressed ascendant moves into Pisces, one of the things is you're going to start noticing that you are there. Well, for one thing, you could come into circumstances where there are just not as many boundaries allowed as there were before. So when you were in Aquarius, there was always this, perceived, and you always, if that's your natal rising sign, you always will be, but, you had to approach life more from, there is always a boundary between myself and others. So when your progressed ascendant moves into Pisces, all of a sudden, life is not really allowing you the same level of boundaries as before. So how do you cope with that? You have to approach life differently. You become more highly intuitive about perceived shifts in the environment. In other words, I would say, because Aquarius is an air sign and it's very logical and rational, it's making those observations that I mentioned before. But in Pisces, everything is not necessarily what it seems. And so you're going to develop a heightened awareness of that. I can't just know what the truth is by simple observation, because people can be duplicitous, right? People can present themselves one way, but the reality can be something totally different. So when your progressed ascendant moves into Pisces, you're going to have to adapt to that and have this sort of heightened awareness so that you can basically protect yourself. And that's something I want to say about the ascendant as well. You know, it is related to the first house. It's the point that begins your first house. Your first house always, whether the sign of Aries is here or not, has that Aries quality. You know, the first house, first sign, second house, second sign, there are correlations there. And Aries and the first house are all about surviving. You know, it is the head. It's how we charge into the world. So with Pisces, you're going to kind of perceive that, like, okay, I'm not really allowed to use a lot of force in the world, or it's not going to go over well. I'm not going to get what I want out of any situation. Most of the time, if I am assertive, or even if I say too much, right? Like with an ascendant in Aquarius, we could just say what our observations are. You know, with Pisces, it's like you have to be aware, like the people and the circumstances that you're around when your progressed ascendant moves into Pisces may not allow for you to even observe reality, right? You're in a hall of mirrors and you have to adjust to that. So your spidey senses get much stronger. Your intuition gets much stronger. You are becoming more of a psychic sponge. At this time in my life, I was about 8 years old when my progressed ascendant moved from the end of Aquarius into the beginning of Pisces. And I had to have this sort of like antenna up at all times to perceive in like shifts in the emotional environment, because my living situation changed. My sister and I started changing with our aunt, or started living with our aunt and uncle. My mom was going in and out of, psychiatric hospitalizations. And it's just like the progressed ascendant in Pisces means you have to sort of be prepared for anything in a very gut level, intuitive way. You know, I need to know beforehand if someone's going to be mad at me if I do something that, prior to this, in any context, I would have observed that this is an okay thing to do, right? But you start to learn just to be aware of what you might need to protect yourself from. Like I said, the ascendant is about your survival instincts. It's the point in which you enter the world, and you are just trying to survive. You're like that little seed that's trying to germinate, and there are so many perils in the world that you might experience. And I would say even like the fact that, at this time my mom was being hospitalized a lot. I mean, she had up until that point as well. Like I think the progressed ascendant moving into Pisces correlates with that as well. Like trying to understand something that can't necessarily be understood in words, or that can't necessarily be understood in a more analytical way. You're going to learn how to do this more when your progressed ascendant moves into Pisces. Like the subtle shifts and changes in other people. Is this person going to have a bad episode, or is someone going to get angry at me? A progressed ascendant into Pisces learns how to navigate those things by sort of like psychically checking the weather. And that doesn't mean you need to actively be a psychic or someone who even is like thinking of yourself as psychic. It's just, it's going to kind of be on autopilot. I mean, Pisces is a little bit of an autopilot sort of sign. Your actions and reactions to life are, they're just kind of intuitive. I don't know how else to say it. But so this is what you can expect, with your progressed ascendant moving into this sign. You always have to be aware that there are things that are not being spoken or shown out loud, and yet you need to be prepared for them. All right, I hope that helped. If you have anything else to add in the comments, especially if you've experienced this progression or observed it in someone else, and you have relevant insights, I would love to hear those. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.